Good afternoon and welcome to our LinkedIn Live. My name's Lucy and I work in dispute resolution. I'll be your host today. So our session today is on mediation at work. If you have any questions about mediation, please drop them in the chat below and our team behind the scenes will answer them. So to begin, please could you tell us a little about yourselves and your organisation? Caroline, could you start?
Yeah, so I'm Caroline Sheridan. I'm a former Chief HR Officer and Compliance Officer. Deep expertise across the people agenda. I'm a fellow of the Civil Mediation Council and the CIPD, and a founder and CEO of Sheridan Worldwide. So wearing two hats, essentially. The CMC is a charity which aims to promote the resolution of conflict and disputes by encouraging the use of mediation and other dispute resolution techniques and methods to advance the education typically of the public in matters related to this. And I sit on the CMC's Mediation Standards Board, and I'm former chair of its workplace and employment group. And CMC has been working, for many years now with Acas to raise awareness of the importance of mediation and its benefits. And we've run a number of conferences with always had Acas's support. So I'm passionate about the restoration of relationships at work and moving from a grievance culture to a resolution one, as is, I know, Acas, and I know obviously CMC. I myself am an executive coach and mediator, and my business is focused on one-to-one and team coaching, restoration of relationships and moving to a high-performance culture. And I'd actually personally like to live in a world where managers and employees alike are upskilled in and able to resolve issues at the very earliest opportunity. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Shaun?
Hello, everyone. I'm Shaun Slack, and I'm a mediator, conciliator, and mediation coordinator based out of London here at Acas. I've been with Acas for 20 years in various dispute resolution and advisory roles. And for the last 18 months or so, I've been concentrating mainly on the mediation part of my role. I find that there is a lot of demand out there at the moment for the service, and parties do seem to benefit, as we'll talk about later, from early resolution.
Thank you, Shaun. And Rob?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Rob Davies, and I'm a mediator and conciliator with Acas. I've been with Acas around 7 years now. And like Shaun, for the last year or so, I've been specialising in delivering mediation nationally.
So we'll start off by looking at mediation itself and what it means to those going through it. Could you please describe mediation and the difference between other forms of conciliation?
Yes, so I'll start off. So mediation is a flexible process conducted confidentially, in which a neutral person actively assists parties towards a negotiated agreement of a dispute or difference, with the parties in ultimate control of the decision to settle in terms of resolution. So by that we mean, when we say voluntary, either party can refuse to participate either at all or beyond a certain point, and either can walk away without any penalty with a total right to refuse any deal they can't accept. It's confidential, both as to the outcome unless agreed otherwise, and anything said or proposed by either side in the course of the mediation process. Focus on solutions rather than blame or legal liability. And so it's not non-judgmental and not a ruling by the mediator. Very much unlimited in the range of possible outcomes and highly effective. I mean, up to 90% of workplace employment mediations can lead to an agreement between two or more parties. And sometimes that rate does differ, but 80% upwards, I know. Moreover, because those solutions are agreed rather than imposed, and the chance of them sticking are much greater. And it's quick. It's obviously sooner dispute, and I can see Shaun nodding here, is resolved, the better. The relationship stands a far better chance of surviving. Legal and management time costs are significantly reduced. I know Acas can talk about more about the cost of conflict, but I'll leave that to you on the line. And parties not yet taken up the entrenched and opposing postures, which can otherwise come, with time and legal threats. And that differs really from other types of dispute resolution, such as conciliation, which I know, of course, Acas are very much involved in as well, which is much more advisory and may result in remedies being proposed to help parties reach settlement. Arbitration, on the other hand, can be a very formal, binding decision-making process as well, more likely contract disputes typically, but follows a similar procedure to court. and the arbitrator makes the award rather than something owned by the parties. So while both mediation and conciliation are aimed to resolve disputes that go into court, the key difference lies in the involvement of the third party. And so in mediation, the mediator is facilitating the conversation, helping the parties to find their own solutions. Whereas in conciliation, the conciliator is offering solutions and guides the parties towards, a settlement, or in the case of arbitration, decides the outcome. And how it works, really, it's really around mediation process itself, which is a very robust one. Recognizes typically that parties in a dispute typically want, at some level, even unconsciously, to get it resolved. It may not be necessarily aware of that because of their potentially entrenched positions at that time, or their fear, went to the process of fear. Is it really confidential, or what else I'd punish? There's lots of things driving and motivating parties. And in mediation, the amazing thing is you can really help to unpick some of this stuff, and parties are importantly in control, the decision making, the outcomes, the responsibilities are theirs. And for the first time, maybe they're back in the driving seat, they're back in the ability to really kind of take responsibility for how they show up and keep their eye on what they ideally want to get, and what they need as a minimum, because they're not the same. And my colleagues on the call might have more to add around those things. I mean, Shaun, I know you're nodding. Is there anything you want to add?
No, I'm very much in concurrence with you there, Caroline. It's early resolution of disputes using methods like mediation, voluntary methods, help avoid the costs of things like investigation. They help save companies recruitment costs, training costs, loss of experience, and in the worst cases, as we've seen, litigation. Mediation can help rebuild engagement, which is vital. We're all looking for increases in productivity, and a happier workforce tends to be a more productive workforce, and that's a benefit for everybody, employers and employees alike.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So moving on from that, how can leaders and managers foster an environment that encourages open communication and the use of mediation?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So, yeah, I think firstly, it's really important to have those everyday conversation with colleagues. Be there to listen and be there with an open mind with colleagues. Be respectful of their views. If you feel a problem is developing, early intervention is priceless. Try not to let things foster. And then remember, when you're talking about mediation with your colleagues, and potentially when you're suggesting mediation as a possible outcome, remember to tell them that it's a safe space where their voice can be heard, and it's an opportunity for them to really be involved in shaping the outcome and shaping the solution, rather than having it imposed upon them.
Thank you, Rob.
I'd like to add that this point you make, Rob, about safe spaces to speak, and that regularity of the one-to-ones, that creating that psychologically safe environment, hoping about active listening and being empathetic, non-judgmental, and people need to be helped to develop these skills, whether that's developing communication skills, or it's conflict skills, or whatever we want to call it, but helping them create those feedback loops in the workplace. Is what we often find when we're at mediation, isn't it? Actually, is that parties are then agreeing ways of working, typically, that they haven't done before, or they haven't really, or there's too much reliance on the manager doing everything, when actually the employee has a responsibility as well. And in mediation, of course, with them being equal, and the mediator working really hard at being impartial and treating them equally, there's a rebalancing of power, the power dynamic as well, which I think links to your point, Rob, about this being about safe, isn't it? I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, that's definitely the case. And you pick up a good point there, Caroline, about parties that come to mediation tend to have got stuck in a negative feedback loop. So it's helping them by gaining their trust and assuring of the confidentiality, getting them back into good habits so that it becomes a positive feedback loop. you're not seeing the worst in your colleague all the time. You start to see them how you did when you first started working with them. I know Rob certainly does this, and I do, reminding them of a time when things were good. I always ask them to tell me, when was this working? And in 99% of the times it was working well. I get them to describe what good looked like.
I think that's lovely. That's so lovely. And I think also what we bring, isn't it, always is hope where they feel there is none.
Yeah.
And they've forgotten actually, once upon a time, this relationship was great.
Yes.
And maybe even they were recruited by that individual.
Yes.
Or they used to work together previously. I know we're all smiling here. It's actually, we've all, I'm sure, and our audience as well, perhaps also can have some empathy with those situations, which are many, to your point, many.
And the beauty of mediation often is when you get to the end of a joint meeting with parties and you can see months, even years of conflicts fall away, and they can actually see the future going forward. It's terrifically rewarding.
Yeah, and all that pent-up anxiety that they're carrying every day, home with them. There's no one to speak to. People will tell them what to do, which is often the last thing they should be doing, all with good intent. But as we know, as mediators, well, intent does not equal impact. And often just surfacing the impact at mediation is so powerful that, use of I statements, that I know we encourage parties to, everything you want to say can go into an I statement. And that can be so powerful, from how I feel is how I feel. And often the other person, isn't it, actually, that they had no idea. Sometimes, of course, they do, saying always, but often actually the other person hadn't realized the scope of the impact that their ways of working were having on the other person. And whether it's fear, anxiety, whether it's avoidance as a trait, that we don't necessarily surface these things, or don't know how to surface these things, how to raise it. That's when we find the cost of conflict is spiraling, isn't it? Acas research shows that so deeply. It's a huge cost to business and to health and well-being, which can be devastating. It has massive consequence for people leaving managers every day.
And the knock-on costs associated with that, as I say, recruitment, retraining, the loss of vital organisational memory and knowledge.
Yes. Yes.
Mediation is a big plus point in trying to save some of that and recover some
Absolutely.
of that.
Yeah, you say this, and immediate people leave their managers, don't they? I don't. Yeah. There's some research you probably have on a stat, maybe, I don't know, but yeah, there is definitely some research on that being quite a high number.
Thank you. That was really insightful. So how would you say that employees can best prepare for a mediation session?
So I think, well, I know in terms of some of the conversations that, we're having at CMC and Acas as well, and this whole thing around early resolution and building a resolution culture, building it into the policy, being really clear about what we mean by informal, as opposed to a grievance process, that grievances can be paused, and that we can be much more kind of, literal about what do you mean by mediation, understanding the process, talking to somebody who can kind of really talk you through what it means to be in a mediation, how giving back control to you is going to change potentially everything, where the person really has got a brick wall and can't see that reality, can't get past the difficulty that they're in. So helping them build their confidence, and actually signposting and having a conversation where their concerns can be raised, and so those concerns and motivations behind them can be really understood, and that can create a different reality for people to understand. Actually, there may well be, with the right support, the right coaching, the right kind of a mediator, the right approach, the flexibility of the process we talked about earlier, what mediation isn't, that can be tailored. So my fears, even about, maybe I did mediation recently where it was a virtual one, and one side, absolutely, we're not going to turn their cameras on. As mediator, thinking, oh my goodness, what impacts are going to have on the other side? But of course, as mediators, we say, well, the mediation is flexible. So I managed to say to the other party, we're going to start with cameras off for the first hour and a half, and then we'll look to maybe turn the camera. So it actually transformed everything. And the reason why the individual because I had a bit of panic as a mediator, thinking, oh my goodness, how is this going to react to the other person in the room? But actually what she said to me was, the reason I want cameras off is I'm now aware that my body language speaks volumes. My body language is what's getting in the way of us having a dialogue. So if the cameras are off, he can just hear my voice. And by just hearing my voice, I can start confidently. And that was a real realization to me. And then naturally, there came a point where we did another round of opening statements and the individual turned the cameras back on. So this is really important because that's part of the control piece. How are we shaping the mediation to allay concerns and fears and address those things so people can really prepare emotionally mediation so they can stay calm and composed. The mediator's been listening to me. I feel heard. It's been adapted. So the discussions might become challenging. I can take a break. Oh, I can call a break. You can call a break. The mediator can call a break. I did one mediation where actually I called a break, and because I felt they were having a massive argument in the mediation. But one party said, no, I really want to go back in there and hear everything she's got to say, because unless I hear everything, everything comes out on the table, I'll never know. And this is my one opportunity to know everything. And then I can change. I can adapt my style. So yeah, meeting the mediator, I think that can help. That can allay fears as well. When they meet, they start to breathe. Oh, gosh, just normal person. This other figure I'm building up in my mind, and so agreeing ground rules, referencing the mediation agreement time and again, the confidentiality to create that confidential bubble around the whole process, and the mediator recontracting around confidentiality throughout. So it's remembered, if anyone has fear around that, then actually an organization then can think about its formal procedures as disciplinary if people don't keep to the confidentiality aspect, because how can that be reinforced? And maybe even understanding my conflict style. Thomas Kilman can be a useful model on occasion, or always on occasion, where maybe my overuse of avoidance is not necessarily helping me build a relationship. And the whole piece around the opening for people on the call today, make an opening non-interrupted, use of I statements, be able to make an opening which is non-interrupted. Often we interrupt without realizing, or to get our words in, and then we miss information because we don't know what the rest of the sentence is going to be. We'll never know. We'll never ever know what someone was going to say if we interrupt too soon. And then helping people use, things like parking. I always say at the beginning of mediation, there may come a time today when you feel like leaving, and that's precisely the moment of time I'm going to ask you to stay. It's typically a point of breakthrough. Or it might be, there may come we go to the area of most difficulty too early in the mediation. And that's the moment where I'm going to say, let's park that topic and we'll come back to it later in the day. Often later in the day, it will be easier to deal with that theme, that area of focus. And again, these signposting, what we do as mediators isn't something that typically managers are skilled in. And I know we're all working really hard to think about how can we upskill everyone in the workplace. If only money was no object, how can we do that really well?
There's some fantastic points there, Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
are there any specific types of workplace conflicts where you feel mediation is less effective? And if so, why?
Yeah, that's a good question, Lucy. I think timing is vital, because if a dispute's gone too far and it's moved over into what we would traditionally, and Caroline's referred to this, consider a conciliation type situation, i.e., it's likely that no matter what, the employment relationship's going to have ended, then you're probably too late for mediation. Although, of course, it can be argued that in itself conciliation is a type of mediation. But once the employment relationship has gone into formally ending, I think you're probably too late to bring it back from the brink. We certainly always preach early dispute resolution. It's going back in time to the Gibbons review. It's why we considered starting to promote the early conciliation service from the same place. Early dispute resolution is vital, and it tends to make things more sticky as well, in terms of their durability, rather than making a sticky situation. So yeah, I would say if you've gone past the point of no return in terms of the employment relationship, mediation is not going to work. We have lots of other services that can help in that situation too, to effectively reduce the effect of dispute. But for it to have real punch, it's got to be in the early toolkit.
I think I'd add to that mediation isn't a substitute for proper management activity. So if for example, there's misconduct in the workplace, mediation is probably not the best method of addressing that, and managers should be looking to the rest of their management toolkit to address actions like that.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. And certainly that's something that when we're wearing our mediation coordinator hats, those of us that do that, and I think Rob does as well as me, we're looking to tease that out of HR professionals we're speaking to, or the commissioners, whoever they may be, if it's management. Why do you think mediation is appropriate at this point? What have you done so far? The usual questions to make sure that you're giving the mediator themselves the best chance of success when it gets handed over, and you're not simply handed something that would be more appropriately dealt with through the formal or informal disciplinary or grievance procedures at the workplace.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you, Shaun. So, what additional resources or training do you think would enhance mediation practices for businesses?
I think start from the basics. I think if you're using in-house mediators, make sure that they get properly trained with a decently accredited training program. Look at ways that they can maintain their continuing professional development, and look at ways you can support them with continuing professional development. Are there workshops? Are there conferences people can attend? Can they get involved in their local CMC, the Civil Mediation Council activities? If you're using an external provider, look for an external provider with a good track record. And also just sell mediation to your workforce, to your people. Let your colleagues understand that mediation is an opportunity for people to have their voice and to be really involved in finding the solution to the conflict, the dispute that they're in at that moment in time.
Good point.
Yeah, I think also this whole piece around upskilling managers, skilled managers work that I know Acas have been very involved in with Richard Saundry and others around upskilling, in-house as well, and even without full qualifications, just being able to have some of those skills, or even being able to be coached by somebody internally if I have an issue. I mean, I'd love to, if I was back in employment, myself ever, join an organisation whereby when I joined, I would be told, look, if you ever have an issue with a colleague or your manager or anyone in your department, that we're here to help coach you to address that early in the moment. I think, wow, that's an organisation I'd like to join. That's definitely an organisation I'd love to join. And yet, how many organisations are there out there really that can say that? Not many.
No. So it's a very, very good point. Sometimes people tend to think of it as a nice to have, but it's totally not, because we've heard a lot about productivity lately, haven't we?
Yes.
And there's no doubt that if people are engaged, they're going to go the extra mile for you. So, it's a vital.
It's so true. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. So as remote and hybrid work models become more common, how do you see the role of mediation evolving?
I think the shift to remote and hybrid work has introduced some new challenges and opportunities for mediation, which is really exciting. I mean, I just remember the shift in COVID times to online and how we had to make Zoom work and all of the above, and how terrified most mediators were that their practices were going to be in shreds, or that no conflict would ever be resolved again. And yet, hey, look at us today doing this virtually, which is amazing. I think where people are working remotely, typically mediation that I would do would be remote. I wouldn't be forcing in person when they're working is remote. And the whole piece about flexibility is, how do they want to mediate? virtually, maybe blended. It might not be one or the other, but many mediations are hybrid anyway. We might do the pre-calls virtually, might do the mediation in person, we might do half the mediation in person, half online, might follow. It depends. Every is different. And I think that does enable even more tailoring to happen. And I think, mediation itself plays a crucial role in addressing these challenges by its structured process being able to be adapted easily, whether it's online or in person as well. And I think mediation can help organisations to navigate the complexities of hybrid working by fostering a culture of openness and communication and collaboration as well. And thinking about cameras on, we referenced that earlier, cameras off, how we can impact in the moment and how we can, as mediators, raise awareness to sometimes things that are outside our awareness as people who are struggling in conflict as well. Of course, the hybrid world has brought many challenges to people. People who have not had training or understanding how to work, because we all fell into it by accident. And now we're looking to kind of help rebuild connection. What do we mean by that? How do we foster days when we can reconnect in person as opposed to online? And the same thing with mediation helps address these challenges by facilitating open dialogue about how we need to adapt ways of working when it's hybrid as opposed to in person, or how do we, in some instances, decide what should be hybrid and what shouldn't be, and again to help teams establish clear expectations and boundaries around these things as well. So I think all of the above, we can't assume, and most assumptions we make in life aren't actually true, and we see that often when we mediate as well. So how do we kind of encourage in-person interactions for, as well on occasion that will help meet people's needs? Think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We all have different needs, and we unless they're somehow discussed. And it's interesting, sometimes mediation is the first time, isn't it, that people really discuss these things. So yeah, it helps organizations manage conflict and improve maybe more inclusive, because we can use the hybrid as well and mediation to really enable people to work in the way they like to work, but also understanding that maybe the other person doesn't have an understanding of that because they work very differently.
Yeah. Certainly, in London, we see such a wide range of expectations. Digital mediation is working very well. A lot of companies still do want that. Certainly for the joint meeting, they want that personal contact. So I'm forever using my Oyster card to bop around town, which can be nice because you see all sorts of different workplaces. But yeah, and also because of who we are, we're dealing with so many diverse types of workplaces. I've been in timber merchants, I've been in corporate blue chips, I've been in local and national government this year, for example, amongst many others. And I know Rob has as well.
The relationships in the workplace have changed since COVID. We're not now just talking about people who might be on a different floor in the office. I've done mediations this year where people have been on different continents. So I think part of the mediation process is helping individuals to recognise that they might need to flex their approach to how they're dealing with colleagues who, as I say, may not be in the next county. They might be, 2,000-3,000 miles away.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's just amazing.
Crazy. Yeah. I've done one earlier this year when one person was in Amsterdam and the other person was in New York. Their employer was London based, but these people will never ever come together face to face, or almost highly unlikely to come together face to face.
Yeah, I had the joys of a Pacific time zone and a London time zone.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. We had to do the joint meeting in 2 parts. So yeah, it's a learning curve for all of us.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. Thank you.
No problem.
How can businesses measure the success of mediation efforts?
I think we've touched on some of this already, in that it's more the intangibles, so an engaged and productive workforce. But if you really drilled down into it, it would be the money saved on things like disciplinary investigations, grievance investigations, the sheer number of grievances or disciplinaries, and all the time that takes out. And at its very worst, obviously, when the worst comes to the worst, the number of settlement and mutual termination conversations they're having with their legal fees that are attendant to that, or the early conciliation where they're doing something similar. So it would be hard for a classic accountant to work it out in pounds, shillings, and pence, but there would definitely be a noticeable difference to the bottom line from those intangibles, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
makes
it does.
total sense. Total sense. I think this whole piece around preserving relationships is, and I mean, it's difficult to put a figure on it, isn't it, really, when people will stay rather than go. But, it is, how do we capture that, I suppose, really more fully in businesses to kind of capture some of the ROI even more, because I think some of the longer term evaluation piece against the shorter term evaluation piece. And I think some people, how do HR pick up that up post mediation internally to kind of gather those statistics, because that can also help, can't organizations really invest more fully into mediation if they've got that kind of measurement more fully as well. So yeah, I completely concur with what you said, Shaun.
Yeah, and it's getting that into a business case, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
sometimes
Yeah.
the bean counters do want that bottom line effect. So it's how do HR explain that you're going to get it, but you may not be able to exactly pin it down there.
Yeah.
It's a question of understanding that, yes, there is a cost to a mediation service today, but that cost is actually dwarfed by the cost of onboarding and getting up to speed a new member of staff to replace someone who's left because of a falling out, a dispute in the workplace.
Absolutely, and the experience they take with them, no matter how good your handover is. If someone's a little bit hacked off in their role, they're going to be less giving when it comes to the handover anyway. So yeah,
absolutely,
win.
Absolutely, thank you. So our last question now. How does mediation contribute to maintaining a positive workplace culture and employee morale?
I'm going to keep banging the drum. Early resolution is best, but if a situation needs mediation, it'll show the employees, the workforce, that the employer values them and wants to ensure and foster their well-being. So having mediation available means that people feel there is an alternative to the formal processes, the HR type processes of disciplinary and grievance. And it can then empower them to be the problem solvers rather than the subject of the solution and having that solution imposed on them.
Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, and I think it's the whole piece around, I think your point around that empowerment piece does speak often to people to take back control, often in organizations when it's a grievance process where they're out of control or they're not told anything, or they feel spiraling downwards, or they focus on all the negatives. And I love Covey's circles of influence, the control, influence, concerns. I always reframe concerns to acceptance. So control what you can control, and of course mediation, you are taking back control because you're entering yourself, you're in the driving seat along with your colleague. The whole piece around influencing, and then you're influencing by I statements. You're actually influencing the other person to understand, step into my shoes, just for a moment or two, and how it feels like for me. And actually where we can't no longer influence or control, then actually that's what we need to reach acceptance, wild acceptance, of that. Well, what does that mean? If it means stay or go, even actually, if I can't accept that this is going to keep gnawing away at me, what's the cost of that? To my family, to my health, to my team, to the organization. I mean, I think 30 billion, isn't it? Acas quote as the cost of conflict. But yeah, the whole piece around that resolution culture piece, I think that whole piece and holding on to that. I know we're all working now towards really looking at that early resolution and trying to shift the dial from agreements to a resolution culture. And it's how many, and at the forward to the Acas code, I think that's been so misinterpreted by many people in HR over the years around. I know the uplift is a thing around, if we don't go to formal process, then we might get the uplift against us awarded. That's something we do need to look at and think about how might other ways of working through issues in the workplace might also ensure the uplift is not applied, because rather than a grievance only, there are other ways as well. And education, and with the CMC and Acas and others in the ADR community really looking at this topic, which I know we are doing, that's going to move the dial another level, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I mean, the danger, of course, is that either having an all or nothing, where you're just doing formal process or you're just doing early resolution, you can move into the mediation becoming somewhat of a box ticking exercise. So it's finding the right balance, isn't it?
Yeah, we don't want it to be a box ticking exercise. That's not going to help anyone.
No.
I mean, at all. That would be awful. That would, so much work has gone into where we are today. We're at a pivotal place in employee relations, and it feels like the wind is blowing in the right direction. And it's just, we want to keep nudging it forward. And the more people that can get on that journey with us, the better. And so I hope all our listeners today can kind of almost really, if they haven't engaged in mediation, why not? What's stopping you? Okay.
Yeah. And it's all about reinforcing with both the commissioner and the parties the voluntary nature. This is nothing if you're not entering into it voluntarily, and it should never, as you quite rightly say, never be about just ticking a box.
No, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes it's not unreasonable though to expect someone to try.
No,
it's not unreasonable to expect people to try to, and I think some part of it, sometimes when we bring hope where that people feel there is none, that's just incredible. When that light bulb goes off and actually when the door's just ajar, what's stopping you just pushing through it just a little bit more and seeing what's on the side? Because of course, we could leave, but actually the job market isn't easy, and these things can bubble up again in our future elsewhere. And I do personally believe that life will constantly throw challenges our way, and relationships, whether they're family, personal, with friends, with work, they're not always easy. And actually the things we value most in life, we have to work for really hard. And it's the same if we're running a marathon, building a muscle, building our stamina. Mediation provides a doorway to huge possibility. Maybe I will really thrive. Maybe one day I can be a mentor for someone else who's struggling. Maybe I'll learn some things about myself I didn't know, or I was unaware of. And actually that resilience that people have, we all have amazing resilience. And I think sometimes mediation, when we are in a very privileged position as mediators, we see that. Maybe their employer will never see it, because we don't necessarily bring our whole self to work, or nor necessarily should we, because, it doesn't actually help always. So anyway, I think, I don't know if you have any more comments, but it's a rich conversation, isn't it?
no.
It's useful to remember that mediation and the mediation meetings are not the finished product. I always describe to my participants that the mediation meeting is there to lay the foundations for a better working relationship going forward. I always encourage participants to take time together in the future to review how they're doing against their agreements. Okay, and actually, as Caroline said, you can, the byproduct from mediation can also be self-reflection and self-growth for one or both of the participants, and there's real value in that as well.
Yeah, you're right. That's an amazing statement. That's completely true. I mean, I remember leaving my first job, because of a relationship with my manager and how I felt. And I mean, this is a long time ago.
Never.
I didn't know anything about mediation then. But do you know what I mean? It's like, it really matters. It really matters.
Yeah.
And hugely, because it's people's lives, and we all have to earn a living. And we have to do something we love doing. And sometimes we may not want to get burnt twice, and we may make all different choices that we didn't necessarily need to make, if only we had the courage and the support and a framework that would help us. And fortunately, we do have that.
No, absolutely.
Indeed.
Yep. I always describe to my parties that mediation, rather like the famous Mao Zedong statement, is the first step in a 1,000-mile journey.
Yeah,
So,
that's lovely.
and to working towards rebuilding that trust that's been lost.
Yeah, and isn't it true? Isn't it? We know also that people don't believe trust can be rebuilt, and yet everything's possible. And I think that's what we do as well, isn't it? It's that we know everything is possible. Nothing is impossible. And having that, holding ourselves with that when we carry ourselves into any mediation is that whole piece that we talked about, hope earlier, brings hope to parties where they felt there was none. And that can change everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very easy for people to lose trust, and sometimes they can't recognize that it can be got back. There's a famous saying, isn't there? Trust arrives on foot but leaves on horseback. And I always say to my parties, this is very normal. You're not the first people to go through that. But I'm asking you to commit to making that first step today to try and get that back, or try and work towards getting that back.
I love that saying.
It's a wonderful saying.
It's a good one, Rob, isn't it?
It is. It's perfect. Absolutely. I always reflect on mediation. One of the beauties of mediation is it gives the participants their voice, even if there's no solid agreement at the end of the joint meeting, to actually have been able to express yourself in a safe environment, a safe non-judgmental environment, has tremendous value to participants.
Totally. Yeah, I completely agree with that, totally, because and often as well, it's some of the stuff that they've shared with us as mediators may never come up in the joint session. And just in being heard sometimes by someone who doesn't judge them, who doesn't rush to, just listens, really, really listens, may be enough to let something go that they've been holding for too long.
Yeah.
They can say without fear when they're dealing with an external mediator, for example, from Acas, because we don't have a hidden agenda. We're not part of their HR function. We're not part of their management function. So people can have the real freedom to express themselves without any fear of it affecting their futures.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, providing that safe bubble for them to have the discussion in.
Yeah.
Yes, and just bringing it back then to your point earlier, Rob, about using people who are properly trained in the process with great skills, because I think it's a real privilege when any of us are invited in to meet people in a difficulty, and that we can then create the environment in which that can really be looked at afresh to create a different future. And done well, it's brilliant. My concern sometimes is if mediation is used as we're mediating, when actually that person's not, if you're not trained in mediation principles fully, then people can get a bad impression of something, which actually is an amazing process. It is phenomenal. Which is why the CMC are very much, around, to your point earlier, Rob, that you made around continuous professional development, supervision, training, keeping fresh, etc. matters. It matters a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you for all those sweet sentiments and stories. They were really great to hear. That seems like a good place to wrap things up. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in to watch our live and everyone at the Mediation Conference. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day. If you have any further questions, do drop them in the chat below and we'll get back to you. To make sure you're staying up to date with all the latest workplace policy changes, make sure you follow Acas on LinkedIn and consider signing up for our e-newsletter for more events and training on mediation. That's it from us. Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.